Hey, everybody. It is Monday, March 31st. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Winunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to on this last day of March 2025. Remarkably, Jill, is a quarter over, 25% over. Tomorrow is April 1st. So it is an important reminder to everyone. The April Fool's jokes probably have already started rolling out. Be aware of your social media feed, even in these crazy times where the headlines do seem too crazy to believe. It's April Fool's Day tomorrow. So these next 48 hours or 72 hours, Jill, I like to call them the most annoying 72 hours in news.
Yeah, you've got all these brands' marketing teams on overdrive, trying to come up with fake April Fool's jokes.
That are somewhat believable.
Somewhat believable. So it's like trying to get that balance of, oh, is that possibly true? And then getting the news organizations to cover it. So yeah, just be on the lookout.
And those are the legit organizations. Then you have like just people out there trying to fool you. AI keeps getting better and better. So if like crazy audio is released, crazy video is released, photos, headlines. Anyway, by the time you're listening to this, there's probably already something in your Instagram feed being like, this company is filing for bankruptcy. This company is announcing free this. Like, ugh, guys. Just like Google it before you message me. I try my best to fact check.
Did you see this? Is this true?
Is this real? Is this real?
On that note, let's get to some very real headlines here. Russian President Vladimir Putin is close to getting on President Trump's bad side, why Trump says he is, quote, very angry with Putin. The president also saying this weekend he couldn't care less if automakers are forced to raise prices in the wake of his new auto tariffs. We'll tell you why. Also an update on Signalgate. Will anyone be fired in the aftermath? What we're hearing. And this isn't an April Fool's joke. President Trump says that there are, quote, methods for seeking a third term and that no, he is not joking.
Yeah, we're going to do a constitutional reality check on that one.
To some international news, nearly 2,000 people reported killed from a devastating earthquake in Myanmar and Thailand. Back to Washington, where RFK Jr. has forced out the FDA's top vaccine scientists, what Mo News is learning. Attorney General Pam Bondi says a leader of the violent MS-13 gang has been arrested in Virginia. Over to Columbia University, the latest interim president is replaced as President Trump threatens the university's funding. Plus, more foreign students associated with pro-Palestinian campus protests are arrested. Democrats are now calling for an investigation.
Yeah, I spoke to the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. We have a bit of that conversation with Jim Himes. And I asked for the line Democrats have on this. I think the explanation will be valuable for you guys.
And finally, Sam Altman says ChatGPT's viral image generation AI is overwhelming its systems. Moshe, you had some fun with that this weekend.
Yes, a lot of fun putting photos of my family and my daughter into ChatGPT and asking it to do things. Jill, apparently too many of us were doing that to the point where Sam Altman and company were like, hey, can all of you take a break on our servers? Thank you.
And finally, Moshe is on this day in history.
Your clue today is a piece of technology, one of the more innovative ones in the past couple decades, Jill, and it made the following sound effect. Boop, boop. Boop, boop.
Okay, we'll look forward to that one. To the news on President Trump's bad side right now, Russian leader Vladimir Putin, Trump saying he is, quote, pissed off at Putin for suggesting that the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, is not a legitimate leader. Putin made those comments on Friday, saying that his counterpart, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, does not have the legitimacy to sign a peace deal and suggested that the country choose an interim government during the negotiation process so there's not any question about the validity of a potential deal. Trump told NBC News over the phone that the suggestion for a new government made him, quote, very angry. He saw it as a potential stalling tactic or a way for Putin to delegitimize U.S. negotiations for an end to the war in Ukraine. He then threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russian oil if Putin doesn't cooperate with a peace deal. He explained that would mean a 25 to 50% tariff on all oil. And if you buy oil from Russia, you can't do business in the United States. Trump says he plans to speak with President Putin this week.
Jill, importantly, Putin also said in recent remarks, which apparently also upset Trump, that he's looking to, quote, finish off the Ukrainian army. Putin has been saying things like that, as well as that Zelensky is not a legitimate president for a while. It comes, as we've told you, Zelensky has postponed his most recent elections meant for last year because of the war. The country under martial law, a quarter of the population displaced, 3 million Ukrainians living under Russian occupation, the country under attack daily. So they haven't had that election. It is interesting coming from Putin, though, who hasn't had a free and fair election in his country going back 2 decades. Nonetheless, what's also interesting here is that Trump himself called Zelensky a dictator when he was mad at him a few weeks ago, criticized the lack of election. But Trump doesn't like that Putin's doing it. He doesn't like the tack here. So it's interesting as Trump plays good cop, bad cop on both sides here as he tries to bring this war to an end. Trump campaigned on being able to end the Ukraine-Russia war in the first 24 hours. Those talks have stalled of late. They have come to some smaller agreements like a ceasefire on the Black Sea, the end to striking energy targets in each other's countries. Nonetheless, over the weekend, Russia was launching hundreds of drones on Ukraine, killed a number of Ukrainians. And so there are a lot of people in Ukraine being like, what's the point of these small ceasefires? Like, he's still attacking civilian targets, areas with restaurants and hotels and homes. And so Putin isn't really honoring the general nature. I mean, he might be specifically honoring the fact that there's no bombs on energy targets, but the spirit of the deal, he's not honoring. So it appears here Trump is now focusing his criticism on Vladimir Putin.
Trump gave those remarks about being, quote, pissed off with Putin in a wide-ranging and candid interview with NBC News over the phone this weekend. He was also asked about tariffs, specifically his promise to impose 25% tariffs on all cars not made in the United States. Those will go into effect this Thursday, April 3rd. Experts have said automakers could raise the price of cars by thousands of dollars as a way to offset those tariffs. The Wall Street Journal reported that Trump told the CEOs of U.S. car companies not to raise prices, but NBC asked Trump about that during his interview, and in response, Trump said that he, quote, couldn't care less if they raised prices. He continued to say, quote, the message is, congratulations, if you make your car in the United States, you're going to make a lot of money. If you don't, you're going to have to probably come to the United States, because if you make your car in the United States, there's no tariff. One of the president's aides followed up with NBC after the interview and clarified that Trump was specifically referring to foreign car prices when he said he didn't care about the prices going up. Almost half of all vehicles sold in the United States are imported. The president's goal with these tariffs is to push companies to set up more auto factories in the United States and make cars here.
Now, we've mentioned this before, but while the White House here is emphasizing foreign-made vehicles, the tariffs are going to affect companies like Ford and GM. Many of their vehicles, American, companies like them, made in Canada and Mexico. Nearly half of the vehicles sold in the U.S., as you noted, are imported. 60% of auto parts in cars assembled in this country come from abroad as well. So in all likelihood, you might have a foreign part in your car. That would then mean a tariff. According to various estimates, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 could be the increase in a new car this year, depending on how much of the tariffs these companies pass along to consumers. So notably, it appears that the president here is saying, I'm going to stick with this, even though the auto supply chain is extremely complex, parts made in dozens of countries. I mean, you might have a vehicle that has parts made in not just one or two countries. We're talking about multiple countries here, very complex systems. And so, whether you can even move all of that manufacturing to the U.S., to some who've studied this stuff, some who worked in this stuff say it's completely unrealistic. So, we're dealing with a tariff reality here for a while. Now, the president's side, the White House will say, if we can bring some manufacturing back to the U.S., this will be worth it. But in the meantime, it comes as the stock market continues dropping. There was a major drop on Friday. Consumers' economic outlook increasingly pessimistic. Jill, we're seeing numbers on the number of people unable to pay their mortgages right now, reaching numbers we haven't seen since 2008, 2009, since the financial crisis, when we were in a recession, when unemployment was, nearly double what we had today, probably more than double. And so consumer spending is down. There's other factors here at play. And, the last thing these companies need is people, avoiding major purchases, and consumers continuing not to spend money. We're very much a consumer economy here. So this is going to be a big week as we watch what actually unfolds with these tariffs and how many of them actually hold.
So there are two main reasons that people are not feeling as good about the economy. One is the fear of a recession, which the Trump administration has not ruled out amidst their economic plans and tariffs. And two, people still feel like prices are up or are still going up. And yet, one of the most inflationary items in the past year, finally seeing some relief. Egg prices have been plunging in recent days as the spread of a deadly bird flu slows down and imports have increased to fill the gap. On Friday, the average wholesale price of eggs was $3, whereas just a month ago, egg prices had reached a record $8.15 wholesale price. It came after a massive avian flu outbreak wiped out more than 166 million chickens since 2022, which caused an egg shortage and steep price increases. Inventories and prices are starting to recover now that fewer birds are dying. The Trump administration has also taken steps to increase egg imports to help with the prices. I'm not sure if those wholesale prices dropping have made it to actually the supermarkets yet. I was in the supermarket this weekend and egg prices were still really high, at least here on Long Island.
Yeah, it's going to take a while to be felt here. Also, note that we're heading into the busiest times for egg sales, Easter, which happens on April 20th. So we still could see prices inch back up here. Nonetheless, Jill, amid all of that, one word for that: excellent.
He did it, people. He couldn't help himself.
I've avoided it because so far the news has been all bad on eggs for a while. So now that we actually have a piece of good news, a yoke of good news. Excellent.
Oh, God, Moshe. All right, let's get back to that interview that the president gave to NBC.
Yes, there is more here. Two more big items that we want to get to.
So there's been a lot of pressure on the Trump administration to fire some people that are involved in so-called Signalgate, especially Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Remember, Waltz accidentally added journalist Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat. And then Hegseth is the one who shared times, weapons, and exact details of the strike plan hours before it took place against the Houthis in Yemen. But Trump told NBC he doesn't fire people because of fake news and witch hunts and says he still has confidence in them. This squares with other reporting from Politico that said that the president has ultimately decided not to fire anyone, not because he isn't angry, he is, but because he doesn't want to give the liberal media and the Democrats a win. That being said, there is some reporting that some of the people closest to Trump, including his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, and Vice President J.D. Vance, who was also in the Signal chat, did suggest that Trump fire Waltz. Trump reportedly agreed Waltz had messed up. And according to CBS News, he has been privately pretty angry with Waltz, mainly for inviting Jeffrey Goldberg into the Signal chat.
Yeah, not upset about the Signal chat itself, but more about, like, why is my national security advisor have Jeffrey Goldberg's number, my arch nemesis, one of my arch nemesis media types in his phone? Now, Trump doesn't like Goldberg. Remember, Goldberg, among other things, is the one who reported that Trump allegedly said in his first term that U.S. soldiers who died in World War II were losers and suckers, which, by the way, was backed up by John Kelly, the former Trump White House chief of staff. But a story for another day in that he said situation. So Trump not happy with Mike Waltz here, but also doesn't want to give a, quote, win to the media, to Democrats. But it's not clear here how long Waltz has. You know, Trump doesn't want to look like he's completely responding to the headlines, to the calls for resignation here. Whether Waltz is still National Security Advisor in, say, June or July is another story here. Now, the number of media leaks that we've seen around this could mean that this is intentional by the White House. And that's always the interesting thing Jill will often do on Mo News Premium is, like, people ask me, like, this leak, what's behind the leak? Who do you think is behind this leak? And depending on who the leak went to, how many people it went to, sometimes it's somebody, working on their own, and sometimes it's a purposeful leak from the official channels, maybe from the president himself. Now, the question, of course, is this a purposeful leak to send a message to Waltz? Is this a leak from sort of a, random person inside the West Wing who doesn't like Mike Waltz? And is this only going to make Trump defend him more? Good question. But it appears here that Mike Waltz is the one that really has the target on him, even though Hegseth, as you look at kind of like who made a bigger mistake here, Hegseth putting out that information, looks like for now, Waltz is the one who's in more trouble.
As far as next steps, the Senate Armed Services Committee requested an investigation from the Pentagon's Inspector General. The FBI and the DOJ are unlikely to investigate. Meanwhile, White House officials seem to be fed up with discussing this story any longer and are increasingly pivoting the narrative to point to issues with Joe Biden's administration, specifically the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. Moshe, last week we spoke to Harrison Fields, who is a top official in the White House press office. He acknowledged that using Signal to have this discussion was a mistake and that it wouldn't happen again. But then he quickly pivoted to that point about Afghanistan. Here's what he said.
No one seriously in the Republican Party is calling for anyone to be fired, especially when no one was fired when Joe Biden withdrew from Afghanistan and you had 13 service members killed, a host of others injured, permanently injured for life. We left $85 billion of military equipment for the Taliban to take over. Not a single soul got fired. Our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, went and got a medical procedure under anesthesia, didn't even tell the commander-in-chief. No one was fired. So we're in a position now and say, which standard are we going to take?
Fields also said that unlike in Afghanistan, no American lives were lost in the attack on Houthis earlier in March. He said, quote, "The only lives that were lost were people who don't belong to be living on this earth, which are terrorists, and we're moving forward."
So I brought that to the top House Democrat on the Intel Committee. Jim Himes is a congressman from Connecticut, is the most senior Democrat there on House Intel. And he called this a false equivalency, that regardless of political party, the executive branch must be held accountable. Now, Himes did note, and this is interesting about Himes, he's a Democrat who was critical of Biden. And he said that he was pretty pissed off on the Afghan withdrawal front. He was upset about the classified information found inside Biden's garage and said as much. But he said the two wrongs don't make a right here. And, Trump has promised a higher standard here, especially since he called for so many resignations and firings after Afghanistan, what the what. But effectively, you get to a lot of a whataboutism in politics. This is not the first time we've seen it. Here's a bit of what Himes said.
If you think that what happened at Abbey Gate, which was appalling and horrible, and yes, there should have been more accountability, Democrats saying that, if you think that that somehow excuses putting pilots at risk when Donald Trump is president, you are guilty of incredible moral reasoning negligence. The rules apply to everybody. And something that happened 4 years ago doesn't excuse we don't accept that excuse from 4-year-old toddlers. I'm a parent. If my 4-year-old toddler comes in after pushing her sister down the stairs and says, "She did it to me last week," do we say, "Oh, yes, darling, that's right. It happened last week. It's okay"? No, we don't. We say, we're going to retain some discernment here.
By the way, you can listen to more from that conversation over on our Instagram page. Both our conversations with the White House Jill, as well as Jim Himes, also up on the Mo News interview podcast.
And another part of that NBC interview with the president from Sunday making headlines, President Trump not dismissing the idea of pursuing a third term in the White House. That is despite the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution, which would prohibit it. The president claiming that, quote, "there are methods to achieving this." He emphasized that he was not joking. He said, quote, "a lot of people want me to do it, but my thinking is we have a long way to go, and I am focused on the current."
So Kristen Welker at NBC is like, "So you've joked about this." He's like, "I'm not joking." But even though in the past he did say he was joking. Nonetheless, Jill, it does not appear there is any legal way. And I, spoke to a couple constitutional law experts on Sunday about this. The 22nd Amendment of the Constitution is pretty clear here. Ratified in 1951, states that no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. And on top of that, you're not eligible to be VP if you're ineligible to be president. So, they brought up the scenario where Vance runs as president, Trump runs as vice president, and then Vance resigns, letting Trump be president again. Technically, that would not be constitutional based on our reading and most people's reading of the Constitution. So I know a lot of you probably seeing this headline out there. It's not clear that there is a legal path for him. Now, there has been attempts, conversations among Republicans in the House. There's a bill from a Tennessee congressman named Andy Ogles that would allow Trump to run for a third term. They would have to amend the Constitution, which means 2/3 of Congress and the majority of states would have to pass that. That's not happening. So, is this continued trolling by the president of Democrats? There is serious talk among Steve Bannon and some others about this. But again, it does not appear that there is any path for him on this front, despite what you might see in the headlines.
The president would also be 82 years old.
82 at the end of this term. He would be 87 by the end of a third term. So effectively, he would be 6 months older at the end of this term than Biden was at the end of his last term. So, questions there as well. Beyond the whole, is it legal for side of things, Jill?
Beyond the Constitution.
Beyond the whole Constitution thing, it'll be super old.
All right, time for the speed read from the Associated Press. Nearly 2,000 people have died as a result of a powerful 7.7 magnitude earthquake. It struck Southeast Asia Friday. More than 3,000 people have been injured. Many more are still missing. The earthquake caused significant effects across the region, including hundreds of miles away in Thailand and India. The epicenter was Myanmar, and the quake led to a state of emergency because of extensive damage and aftershocks, which have made it really tough to search for survivors. Early estimates from the U.S. Geological Survey showed that the death toll could rise above 10,000. The economic loss could also surpass Myanmar's GDP. Parts of the country have been decimated, including its second largest city, Mandalay, home to 1.2 million people, and some of the country's most historic religious and cultural monuments.
There are a few reasons here why the death toll is so high here. This struck that city of Mandalay with a huge population. Myanmar also been suffering from a bloody civil war for a number of years here. So several million people in the country already displaced, not living in permanent structures, a third already in need of humanitarian aid. Also, unlike other earthquakes, this happened at very shallow depth, only about 6 miles below the surface. Similar to that, you might remember a couple years ago that major earthquake between Turkey and Syria that killed tens of thousands of people. And so because of how shallow this quake is, and also the nature of it, the way the earth moved horizontally as opposed to the two plates basically going underneath each other, for lack of a more technical explanation, basically the type of earthquake it was made it extremely deadly here. And so you have the continuing crisis we're watching in Myanmar here, Jill. Also, many of you may have seen the pictures, the videos from Thailand. We posted a couple on the Instagram feed. This is remarkable. Bangkok, 600 or so miles away from the epicenter, 18 dead there, several dozen injured. Remarkable video of skyscrapers swaying and one major one under construction collapsing completely. That's the reason for those deaths we've seen there. Jill, also over the weekend, we posted a video, CCTV footage on top of a pool, on top of a skyscraper. So these people were like dozens of stories up in the skyscraper at this infinity pool. And you see the footage of the earthquake beginning as they're like on a raft in a pool, the water going over the side of the building, the glass separator falling off the side of the building, rafts going off. They remarkably, are able to get out of the water and onto the main part of the pool deck before going off the side of the building. So pretty freaky footage there from Bangkok. You can check that over on the Mo News Instagram account. Thankfully, those two individuals are safe, but the tragedy unfolding here in Southeast Asia is one we'll be watching for a while.
From the Washington Post, Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on Friday pushed out the nation's top vaccine regulator and an architect of the U.S. program to rapidly develop the COVID vaccines. Peter Marks joined the FDA in 2012. He had overseen its Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research since 2016. He wanted to work with RFK, but things don't seem to have gone well. The FDA does fall under HHS jurisdiction. Marks was reportedly offered the choice to either resign or be fired, so he opted to resign. He had grown increasingly concerned by Kennedy's attitude toward vaccines and the measles outbreak. In his resignation letter, he wrote that he was particularly worried about that measles outbreak. It spread to nearly 500 confirmed cases in 20 states. He felt the government has had a pretty tepid response to it. Meanwhile, RFK Jr. had previously downplayed the effectiveness of vaccines, including the measles vaccine, but has since abided by government standard in supporting the vaccine. Mark said in his letter, quote, undermining confidence in well-established vaccines that have met the high standards for quality, safety, and effectiveness is irresponsible, detrimental to public health, and a clear danger to our nation's health. In a statement, an HHS official responded, quote, if Peter Marks does not want to get behind restoring science to its golden standard and promoting radical transparency, then he has no place at the FDA under the strong leadership of Secretary Kennedy.
Though it's interesting, Jill, as this was unfolding on Friday night, I was getting notes from some former Trump officials and Republicans who were surprised by this. They were hoping RFK wouldn't go this far. They called Marks extremely valuable and also someone who cuts through the nonsense, cuts through the bureaucracy, cuts through the red tape at the FDA, makes things more efficient. So to speak, something that Trump is pushing for. They say that Operation Warp Speed only happened because Marks was able to cut through a lot of the various hoops that exist within the agency. He was hoping to work with RFK. We should mention, by the way, Mark's supporter of vaccines, but not mandates. So he felt he could come to some common ground here, but it was getting increasingly concerned here about RFK's approach on vaccines. And it's not just that he's in charge of vaccines. Mark's in running that unit you mentioned, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER. This is huge. Effectively, what it does here is, he finds the balance of innovation and regulation on gene and cell therapies, development of drugs, a whole variety of things. So I was talking to somebody, former HHS official, who worked under the first Trump administration, who was like, well, maybe they could have taken vaccines out from under him. But what about all the other stuff that he's done? Here's the quote that I got. Peter was the head of the biologics division at FDA. This doesn't just impact vaccines. He was ensuring FDA would find the right balance of innovation. There are kids alive and walking because of Peter Marks. He recognized patient experience. So, we're going to continue to watch the fallout there, Jill. Of course, we had our, brief interview with RFK last week. And so we'll continue to monitor all things that he's up to over there.
From USA Today, the alleged leader of the violent MS-13 street gang on the East Coast was arrested in Virginia late last week. This is according to the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. She lauded the arrest of the 24-year-old man from El Salvador. She described him as one of MS-13's top 3 leaders in the United States and called this a major victory in the Trump administration's effort to crack down on a gang known for brutal violence and extortion. Henry Santos was taken into custody in Northern Virginia on an outstanding administrative immigration warrant. He was charged with illegal gun possession after agents found several firearms during the search of his home. Bondi said that he was living in the U.S. illegally. He was living at his mother's house in Woodbridge, Virginia, which is a suburb about 23 miles southwest of Washington.
Yeah, for what it's worth, by the way, she says her son was totally not in a gang. We are hearing, though, from the Justice Department that agents found something that indicated association with MS-13 in his bedroom in the garage. The plan right now is to have him deported to El Salvador, where hundreds of alleged gang members were sent earlier this month. Remember, we're paying, as the U.S. government right now is paying about $20,000 per prisoner to have the Salvadorians house them in their mega prisons down there. But we are still awaiting more details here on how senior this guy was within MS-13, what other evidence they had of his involvement in the gang, and how significant of a arrest this is, especially given the horrific crimes MS-13 has been up to across the country.
From the New York Times, the latest chaos at Columbia University, Katrina Armstrong stepping down as interim president after less than a year on the job. It comes as the school recently agreed to a list of demands by the Trump administration to start negotiations to restore that $400 million in federal funding. The Trump administration pulled that funding after accusing the school of inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students. Columbia's agreement was widely condemned by faculty and students as an act of capitulation. Armstrong was named the interim president in August. The previous president, Manoush Shafiq, stepped down. She'd been widely criticized for her handling of pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel campus protests last year. Claire Shipman is a former ABC reporter. She's also the co-chair of the board of trustees, so she's going to assume the role of acting president. Earlier this month, Mahmoud Khalil, a protest leader who previously studied at Columbia, was arrested after the Secretary of State revoked his student visa for allegedly supporting Hamas.
So just the latest chaos at Columbia University. This is now the third president, Jill, in just about 8 months there at the university. They're trying to strike a balance and can't find a way to strike a balance between their very liberal student base and faculty base, and on the other end, accusations that they've allowed rampant anti-Semitism, and now the Trump administration saying we're taking away $400 million unless you do a bunch of things. So it appears the previous president felt she had no choice, given the major stakes here. Nonetheless, forced out internally So we'll see what happens. It comes as there's, increasing pressure, not just on universities themselves, but we are seeing on a daily basis here, Jill, foreign students here on visas being arrested on campuses, increasing alarm about what the federal government is up to here. It appears Secretary of State Rubio is enforcing this law that was never really enforced or used going back decades, that basically allows the Secretary of State to just cancel visas, cancel green cards, if they feel that this person is posing a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Now, the latest story that we were watching over the weekend was ICE agents arresting a graduate student over at the University of Minnesota. Minnesota being one of the schools that investigators said they would scrutinize for protecting or not protecting Jewish students on campus. Most of the students who've been arrested on visa issues, many of them were engaged in protests. Khalil in particular, his group was charged with invading a building and engaging in harassment and a whole variety of things. But in some of these cases, we told you last week about the case of the Tufts student who was arrested by 6 plainclothes officers in masks in Massachusetts. She had written an op-ed piece for the college newspaper, hadn't otherwise engaged in protests, had never invoked Hamas even in the op-ed piece. The op-ed piece basically says there's a genocide happening in Gaza, and there's a whole bunch of Democrats who are like, I don't agree with what she had to say or her characterization of what's going on in Gaza, but we don't cancel visas and kick people out of the country, arrest them for writing op-ed pieces where we disagree with some of their viewpoints. And there's a murky situation here legally, because technically, according to the Supreme Court, if you're a visa holder, if you're a green card holder, you do have freedom of speech. You do have some of the basic inherent rights of the Constitution, but you still are in a different status than a citizen. And separate from that, there's been wide latitude given to the executive branch when it comes to deportations. So while at the same time visa holders have freedom of speech, the executive branch has a wide latitude to cancel visas. So there's some interesting cases here, Jill, that could trickle up to the Supreme Court. They appear to be very busy on a variety of fronts due to all the things that are happening right now. But this is something we're going to watch. This is something we also talked about with Jim Himes. I mentioned I interviewed him on Friday, the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee. And I said, listen, where is the line for Democrats here? Like, where are you okay with canceling visas and where are you not okay with canceling visas? Now, he said, we're going to look back at this period like it's 1950s Joseph McCarthy, McCarthyism, where we started dubbing everyone a communist. And, in retrospect, looks like overreach. That's how he deemed it historically. Here's the line that he draws when it comes to who gets their visa canceled and who shouldn't.
We have a line that is established by laws. So if you commit a crime, if you provide material support to Hamas, gone. If you commit a crime by breaking a window to get into a school building, gone. But if your behavior is simply consistent with the cherished right, that the reason we exist as a country is your right to believe what you want, no matter how absurd, if that's all you've done, you don't get kicked out. You don't get imprisoned in Louisiana.
So that's the Himes standard. That's the Democratic standard here. But Jill, ultimately, Democrats in the minority on Capitol Hill. So it's going to be up to judges to decide here as these various legal disputes go up the chain.
From CNBC, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, said that the viral use of ChatGPT's new image generation AI is overloading the company's servers and melting its processing circuits. He posted on X or Twitter that it was super fun to see everyone loving the new product, but that his company could not keep up.
Jill, it's not clear that it was like literally melting circuits. I think he meant more like metaphorically melting circuits.
As I'm literally picturing wires melting.
Melting, just, like, getting too hot.
Like,
just
what
like
is happening back there?
And Sam Altman's like running around being like,
pouring water.
It's all melting.
Opening windows. He does say they're going to temporarily limit the feature's usage until they could make it more efficient. The image generation tool is said to be able to produce everything from diagrams to infographics to logos and stock photos. It can also adapt images it's given. It was rolled out to ChatGPT Plus, Pro, and Team users on Tuesday. Free users will soon be able to generate up to 3 images per day.
Yeah, so Jill, here at Mo News, we pay for ChatGPT, so we have eligibility. But I noticed that over the weekend, I was futzing around with it. If you are a premium follower, you might have seen I posted a couple photos. Like literally, I put into ChatGPT like photos of my daughter, my wife, and me. And I was like, make us Simpsons, make us Muppets. And like fairly impressive, actually. But as I tried to make the images, I was getting like a notification being like, you need to wait 11 minutes for this. You need to wait 17 minutes for this. We appreciate your
We're
patience here.
melting.
Well, whereas typically you put something into ChatGPT and it's like, ask them anything that ever has happened in the world. Ask them to write like, literally, like please write me a screenplay, for a TV show, and it'll churn it out within a few seconds. With the image thing, it was the first time ever I've gotten like notification being like, we can't do this. We'll get back to you in 15 or 20 minutes.
And finally, some March Madness news from The Athletic. Just because there's no Cinderella doesn't mean there can't be a storybook ending. In 2025, the crown will go to a number 1 seed as all 4 top dogs, Auburn, Duke, Florida, and Houston, advance to the Final Four for the second time in tournament history. So the Blue Devils will face the Cougars while the Tigers take on the Gators, both in San Antonio on April 5th.
So Jill, history here, because typically there's more upsets. So for the first time since 2008, that was the only other time when the Final Four was all the number 1 seeds. Because typically you're like, there's no way all the number 1s will get through. I gotta, when you pick your bracket, right? You're like, I gotta take a 4 seed. I gotta take a 7 seed. I gotta take whatever. Well, this year, the number 1s are all in it. It appears that as they rank them, as they put them in there, these have turned out to be the 4 best teams. We should note if you're into college sports and you follow the conferences, the SEC conference had 14 bids. 14 of their teams made the tournament. 2 of them remain. Those are Florida and Auburn there. So some history there for the SEC. But right now, if you're looking at the betting odds in Vegas, Duke continues to be the early favorite to win the entire tournament. And Jill, I should mention, we had our own brackets going over at Mo News Premium. About 1,100 of the premium users actually submitted brackets. And so we will have updates there on who the likely winners are going to be and are going to win. I think we have an Amazon gift card going to you, a free year of premium. Second and third place, you get other free items. So thanks to all of you in the premium world for participating in the brackets over there. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. We start in 1889 on this day. The Eiffel Tower officially was inaugurated. It was meant to mark 100 years since the French Revolution from 1789 to 1889, a technological masterpiece at the time by Gustave Eiffel. It was actually meant to be temporary. It was actually built for the World's Fair in Paris. It was meant to be brought down at some point, but it had utility because they put a radio tower at the top of it, and people liked it. So they kept that Eiffel Tower. They didn't tear that thing down.
I'm glad they kept it, Moshe. What would Paris be without it?
I know. I think Paris itself is probably pretty happy that they made the call to like, hey, we're going to keep that large iron thing we just put in the middle of the city. All right. On this day in 1918, clocks in the U.S. were set 1 hour ahead for daylight saving time for the first time, initially done during World War I to try to save energy. And there begins the controversy, Jill. Daylight saving time on this day, 107 years ago. On this day in 1968, Lyndon Johnson, the president, ends a televised speech where he's giving an update of the Vietnam War, and then in like the last minute, Jill, says, I'm not going to seek re-election this year. Stunning viewers, stunning the country, stunning some people in his own party. If you watch the speech, LBJ is doing this whole update. He would do these regular updates in the Vietnam War, and then he sort of ends the speech with like, and that's why I've decided not to run again in March of an election year. It's notable history on this day. Of course, just a few decades later, we would have, dissimilar but similar situation in Joe Biden deciding in an election year to withdraw from his campaign. Jill, a fun item on this day, many of us, I don't know if we remember where we were when we learned this news, but on this day in 1999, 26 years ago, Fabio was hit in the face by a bird while on a roller coaster in Virginia. Remember those pictures?
Oh, I do. Because I have spent many more time than I'd like to admit watching and rewatching the video. Because what are the odds? he went on a roller coaster as a way to promote, I think it was Busch Gardens.
It was Busch Gardens in Virginia, yeah.
Yeah, so he went on a roller coaster as a way to promote this new ride. And he came off covered in blood and feathers.
On his face. Yeah, a goose hit him in the face. Fabio, like a model known for his face, and the I can't believe it's not butter commercials. And so... Anyway, for those of you who are too young to remember it was a moment for all of us. Look it up. It was like before
Google
YouTube. It was before like the internet was a real thing, but like it went viral even in social media days.
Because it was insane.
It was insane. It was like this model got hit in the face by a goose.
He came off like people were just like, What is that ride? What happened
I
there?
can't believe it's not butter. All right. The answer to your clue here from the beginning. Boop, boop. TiVo. Remember TiVo?
Ah, yes. I couldn't
TiVo.
figure it out.
The first modern DVR comes out on this day in 1999. Also, the same day Fabio got hit in the face by a goose, TiVo was released. TiVo effectively becoming like Google, like Kleenex, like, I'm going to TiVo it. The idea of being able to record a show without having a videotape and having to rewind it, a digital recording device, and then sort of lost its market share as everyone else kind of took on that technology and every cable box had DVR. But props to TiVo on this day in history. And Jill, celebrating his 30th birthday today, Tommy Boy, starring Chris Farley and David Spade, premiered in theaters on this day in 1995. And there are your elder millennial news headlines on this day.
I think we touched on everything. We had some really good political headlines, some pop culture, something totally silly that I could laugh at. We got it all in.
And for those of you in the sort of 35 to 50 age bracket, Fabio, TiVo, and Tommy Boy.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. The reviews really do help.
And look out for those fake headlines. April Fool's Day is just hours away. But not from here at Mo News. We will only give you serious news and report on the nonsense online. But we will not try to fake you out. I promise.
We should, actually. We should come up with
All right, Jill does not promise not to fake you out.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.